The transmission crackled through the void, carrying with it the screams of the dying and the smell of burning worlds. Admiral Marcus Kane stood rigid on the bridge of the Defiant, his weathered hands gripping the command rail as the horror unfolded. Before him on the main screen, new Terra burned. The once green world that had housed over 12 million human colonists was now a charred wasteland, its cities reduced to glowing craters by Corvan plasma bombardment. The attack had come without warning, without provocation, without even a declaration of war. The Corvan Empire had simply decided that humanity was weak enough to be prey. They were wrong. "Sir," Communications Officer Lisa Park's voice trembled as she turned from her console. "We're receiving survivor transmissions from the surface. They're requesting immediate evacuation." Kane's jaw tightened. Through the static-filled emergency broadcasts, he could hear the voices of his people. Mothers calling for their children. Fathers trying to organize desperate resistance with farming tools against alien war machines. Children crying for parents who would never answer again. The Corvans had made this personal. "How many survivors?" Kane asked, his voice deadly calm. "Estimated 300,000 scattered across the southern continent. The rest ... Park's voice broke. "The rest are gone, sir." Kane closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 12 million souls pressing down on his shoulders. When he opened them again, they burned with a cold fire that made his bridge crew step back instinctively. The Corvan Empire had ruled a quarter of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. Their military doctrine was simple and effective. Identify weaker species, overwhelm them with superior firepower, and enslave or eliminate the survivors. They had conquered 47 different civilizations using this method, but they had never faced humans. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these front lines to you. "Get me Admiral Torres at command," Kane ordered. "Priority Alpha transmission." Within moments, the grizzled face of Admiral Elena Torres appeared on the screen. Her expression was granite hard, and Kane could see his own fury reflected in her eyes. "Marcus," she said simply. "I know. Orders, ma'am?" Torres was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her words carried the weight of destiny. "The cabinet has met in emergency session. The president has signed Executive Order 447. Kane felt his blood turn to ice. Executive Order 447 hadn't been invoked since the Species Wars 3 centuries ago. It meant only one thing: total warfare authorization. "The gloves come off," Torres continued. "No prisoners. No mercy. No quarter." The Corvan Empire wanted to see what humans are capable of when pushed too far. They're about to find out. Kane nodded slowly. Around him, his bridge crew stood straighter, their faces hardening with grim determination. They had all seen the reports from New Terra. They had all heard the screams. "What are our orders, Admiral?" "Gather the fleet. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier humanity can muster. We're going to show these aliens why their ancestors used to tell scary stories about creatures that hunted in the dark." Torres's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're going to remind the galaxy why humans are apex predators." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Kane turned to face his crew, seeing his own determination reflected in their faces. "You heard the Admiral," he said quietly. "Send word to all human colonies, all military installations, all merchant vessels. The hunt begins now." As the Defiant turned away from the burning remnants of New Terra, Kane made a silent promise to the dead. The Corvans had awakened something they didn't understand. They had poked a sleeping giant, and now they would learn why humanity had spent centuries trying to be civilized. That experiment was over. Across human space, ancient protocols activated for the first time in 300 years. On Mars, the great shipyards that had been converted to civilian manufacturing suddenly retooled, their assembly lines now churning out instruments of war. On Europa, the ice mines became ammunition factories. On Luna, the research facilities began producing weapons that hadn't seen daylight since humanity's darkest hours. But it wasn't just the machines that awakened. It was something deeper, more primal. Captain Jake Miller stood in the briefing room aboard the Retribution, watching as his Marine battalion listened to the tactical briefing. These were the peacekeepers and colony guards. They had been a week ago. Something had changed in their eyes, something ancient and terrible. The Corvins believe they understand warfare, Colonel Beth Hayes explained, her pointer indicating alien ship configurations on the holographic display. They've conquered 47 species using the same doctrine. Overwhelming force applied to civilian targets until the enemy surrenders. She paused, letting her words sink in. They don't understand humans. They don't understand that when you hurt our families, when you kill our children, you don't get an enemy army. You get something much worse. You get an entire species that has decided you need to die. The Marines nodded grimly. Miller could see it in their faces, that look he recognized from the history books. The same expression their ancestors had worn at Gettysburg, at Normandy, at the Battle of Titan Ridge. It was the look of humans who had decided that mercy was a luxury they could no longer afford. "Sir," Sergeant Tom Stone raised his hand. "What about the Galactic Accords? Rules of engagement?" Hayes smiled coldly. "The Corvins voided those when they targeted civilians. As of 0600 hours yesterday, humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council. We're not bound by their rules anymore." The implications hung heavy in the air. For 2 centuries, humanity had been the galaxy's reluctant peacekeepers, the species that mediated conflicts and enforced the accords that kept civilizations from destroying each other. They had been the adults in a galaxy full of children. Now the adults were angry. On Earth, President Sarah Chun addressed the species from the rebuilt ruins of Geneva. Her words were broadcast to every human world, every ship, every outpost scattered across the stars. "My fellow humans," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to unleash. "For 3 centuries, we have chosen to be civilized. We have chosen diplomacy over destruction, cooperation over conquest. We have been the galaxy's guardians, its protectors, its voice of reason." She paused, her eyes hardening. "The Corvin Empire has made that choice for us impossible. They have shown us that there are those in this galaxy who mistake our civility for weakness, our restraint for fear. They have learned, too late, that they were wrong on both counts." Across human space, shipyards worked around the clock. Factories that had produced consumer goods for centuries now manufactured weapons of war. Research facilities released technologies that had been locked away since humanity's violent past, deemed too dangerous for a civilized galaxy. The Corvins had wanted to see what humans were capable of. They were about to get their wish. "We tried to be gardeners," President Chun continued. "But some weeds can only be removed by fire. The Corvin Empire planted the seeds of this war when they murdered our children. Now they will reap the whirlwind." In the depths of space, the human fleet gathered. Ships emerged from hidden bases that officially didn't exist, carrying weapons that violated a dozen galactic treaties. Humanity's true military might, carefully concealed for centuries, finally revealed itself. Admiral Torres stood on the bridge of the flagship Nemesis, watching as her fleet assembled. 5,000 ships of the line, 10,000 support vessels, and 2 million Marines who had volunteered for what everyone knew would be a war of extermination. "Admiral," her aide approached carefully, "the other galactic powers are requesting a meeting. They want to mediate." Torres laughed bitterly. "Tell them the time for mediation ended when the first human child died on New Terra. Tell them that. If they want to avoid sharing the Corvin's fate, they should stay out of our way." The aide hesitated. "Ma'am, they're threatening economic sanctions if we don't cease hostilities." "Economic sanctions?" Torres turned, her smile sharp as a blade. "They're welcome to try. But they should remember that we build their ships, grow their food, and power their cities. They need us far more than we need them." The galaxy was about to learn a harsh lesson about threatening humanity's children. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was hungry for blood. The first Corvin patrol fleet died without ever understanding what killed them. The attack came in the Rigel system, where 12 Corvin destroyers had been conducting what they called pacification sweeps, systematically hunting down human refugee ships. It was routine for them, sport almost. They had done this to dozens of other species, but humans were different. Captain Alex Stone crouched in the maintenance shaft of the cargo freighter Persistence, His small team of Marines pressed against the walls around him. The ship's distress beacon had drawn the Corvan patrol like moths to flame. Exactly as planned, through his tactical display, Stone watched the alien boarding shuttles dock with their supposedly helpless vessel. The Corvans followed their standard procedure: board the ship, separate the valuable slaves from the expendable population, then space the rest. They never considered that the helpless freighter might be bait. "Remember," Stone whispered into his cum, "these are the aliens who burned New Terra. These are the ones who killed our families." The Marines nodded grimly. They had volunteered for this mission knowing it was suicide. What they hadn't expected was how much they were looking forward to it. The Corvans entered the cargo bay in their typical arrogant formation, energy weapons raised but not quite ready. They expected terrified refugees, not trained killers. Stone smiled coldly and triggered the ambush. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration in human creativity applied to warfare. The cargo containers exploded outward, revealing hidden weapon emplacements. The refugees threw off their disguises and opened fire with military-grade pulse rifles. The ship's artificial gravity reversed, sending the disoriented Corvans floating helplessly into prepared kill zones. But it was what happened next that would echo across the galaxy. As the surviving Corvans tried to retreat to their shuttles, they found the docking bays sealed. The human freighter suddenly sprouted weapon arrays that had been disguised as cargo pods. Point defense systems that shouldn't exist on a civilian vessel began systematically destroying the Corvan destroyers. Within 20 minutes, 12 ships that had terrorized human space for weeks were nothing but expanding debris clouds. The tactic was repeated across a dozen systems simultaneously. Human vessels that appeared helpless would lure in Corvan patrols, then reveal themselves to be warships in disguise. Civilian stations that broadcast surrender signals would suddenly bristle with hidden weapons. Even escape pods carried enough firepower to cripple unsuspecting enemy ships. Admiral Kane watched the tactical reports flow in from his command center, feeling a grim satisfaction. The Corvans had expected humans to fight like every other species they had conquered, with honor, following predictable military doctrine, accepting defeat when overwhelmed. They had never faced an enemy that treated war as a puzzle to be solved, rather than a ritual to be performed. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the Corvan High Command is recalling their patrol fleets. They're consolidating around their fortress worlds." Kane nodded. The first phase was complete. The Corvans had learned that human civilian vessels weren't defenseless prey. Now came the second lesson. "Signal the fleet," Kane ordered. "Begin Operation Reaper." Across human space, the real fleet emerged from hiding. Not the converted civilian vessels that had bloodied the patrol fleets, but the true military might that humanity had been concealing for centuries. Ships that had never appeared on any galactic registry, weapons that violated every treaty the species had signed, technologies that had been deemed too dangerous for civilized warfare. The galaxy watched in horror as humanity revealed what it had become during its centuries of apparent pacifism. While other species had stagnated in their military thinking, humans had been quietly perfecting the art of war. They had studied every conflict, analyzed every tactical doctrine, and prepared counters for every possible enemy. What the galaxy had mistaken for weakness was actually restraint, the careful control of a species that had learned to be very, very good at killing. Lieutenant Commander Nova Price stood on the bridge of the stealth destroyer Shadow, watching as her ship approached the first Corvan fortress world. The planet bristled with defensive installations that could repel any conventional assault. Unfortunately for the Corvans, humans had stopped fighting conventionally centuries ago. "Target acquired," her weapons officer reported. "Singularity torpedo. Loaded and ready." Price smiled coldly. The Singularity torpedo was a weapon so devastating that humanity had banned its own use 200 years ago. The Corvans would be the first enemy to experience it since the species wars. "Fire," she ordered. The weapon streaked through space, invisible to Corvan sensors until it was too late. When it detonated, it didn't explode, it imploded, creating a micro-black hole that lasted just long enough to consume the planet's primary defense station and everything within a 50-kilometer radius. The fortress world's shields flickered and died. Its defensive grid went dark. In the space of seconds, an impregnable stronghold had become a sitting target. "Signal the fleet," Price commanded. "The door is open. Begin planetary assault." The Corvins had wanted to see what humans were capable of when their families were threatened. They were about to learn that the answer was anything necessary. The Corvin Empire had ruled the galaxy for 1,000 years. In 3 months, humanity reduced it to a handful of fleeing refugees scattered across the outer rim. Admiral Torres stood in the Strategic Command Center on Luna, watching as the holographic galaxy map updated in real time. Red markers indicated confirmed Corvin positions. Green showed human-controlled space. The tide of green had swept across nearly a quarter of the galaxy like a plague. "Status report," she ordered. "General Marcus." Webb stepped forward, his expression grim but satisfied. "The Corvin homeworlds have fallen. Their industrial capacity is completely destroyed. Fleet estimates put their remaining forces at less than 2% of pre-war strength." Torres nodded. The campaign had been methodical, relentless, and utterly without mercy. Unlike every other war in galactic history, humanity had refused to accept surrender. They had refused to negotiate. They had simply continued killing until there was nothing left to kill. "What about their civilian population?" Torres asked. Webb hesitated. "Per Executive Order 447, no distinction has been made between military and civilian targets. The Corvin species has been reduced to approximately 50 million individuals, scattered across 43 worlds in the Outer Rim. 50 million. From a pre-war population of over 200 billion. The number should have horrified Torres. But all she could think about were the 12 million humans who had died on New Terra, the children who had been vaporized in their schools, the families who had been murdered for the crime of being human. "Not enough," she said quietly. Webb nodded. "The hunt continues, Admiral. Captain Stone's pursuit fleet is tracking the largest concentration of survivors toward the Andromeda Gate. They won't escape." Across the galaxy, other species watched in stunned silence as humanity demonstrated what total war actually meant. The Corvin Empire hadn't just been defeated, it had been systematically exterminated. Every world, every ship, every last trace of their civilization had been methodically destroyed. And humanity wasn't stopping. Captain Jake Miller crouched in the ruins of what had once been the Corvin capital city. His Marines spread out around him in a standard search pattern. The city had been beautiful once, all soaring spires and crystal gardens. Now it was a charred wasteland that stretched to the horizon. "Contact," Sergeant Stone's voice crackled through the comm. "Thermal signatures, grid reference 77 Alpha. Looks like a family group." Miller felt the familiar tightness in his chest. A family group. Probably children hiding with their parents in some basement or bunker, terrified and starving. Under normal circumstances, his Marines would secure them, process them, maybe even show mercy. But Executive Order 447 was still in effect. And these weren't normal circumstances. "Rules of engagement?" Stone asked, though they both knew the answer. Miller closed his eyes for a moment, seeing the faces of human children from New Terra, remembering the screams that had echoed across the void. When he opened them again, his expression was stone. "No prisoners," he said quietly. "No exceptions." The galaxy had expected humanity's rage to burn hot and die quickly. Instead, it burned cold and steady, like a forge that would never cool. Human fleets pursued fleeing Corvin survivors to the very edge of known space. Human Marines hunted down every last refugee, every hidden colony, every desperate attempt at escape. Other species began to panic. If humanity could do this to the mighty Corvin Empire, what did that mean for the rest of the galaxy? The Zephyrian Council sent a formal protest. The Altarian Federation threatened sanctions. The Vegan Confederacy demanded an immediate ceasefire. Humanity ignored them all. President Chen addressed the galaxy from the bridge of the Nemesis, her words broadcast on every channel, in every language. "For 3 centuries, she began, humanity has served as the galaxy's peacekeepers. We have mediated your conflicts, protected your trade routes, and enforced the laws that kept you from destroying each other. We asked for nothing in return, except the right to live in peace." Her expression hardened. "The Corvin Empire denied us that right. They chose to make war on our families, our children, our future. They wanted to see what humans were capable of when pushed beyond our limits. She gestured to the tactical display behind her, where the last red markers representing Corvan survivors were being systematically eliminated. This is what we are capable of. Total warfare. Complete extermination. The utter destruction of those who threaten our kind. The Corvan Empire learned too late that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons. It's our ability to never, ever stop hunting those who hurt our own. The transmission ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. Bridge of the pursuit ship Vengeance. Captain Alex Stone watched as his fleet cornered the last major group of Corvan survivors at the edge of galactic space. 300 ships carrying perhaps 5 million civilians, all that remained of a civilization that had once ruled a quarter of the galaxy. They're requesting terms for surrender, his communications officer reported. Stone smiled coldly. Tell them humanity doesn't accept surrender from child killers. The final battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Corvan Empire was truly extinct, but humanity wasn't finished. They had learned something about themselves during the long hunt. Something that both thrilled and terrified them. They were good at this. Very, very good. 1 year after the massacre at New Terra, the galaxy had learned to fear the dark. Ambassador Elena Santos walked through the halls of the rebuilt Galactic Council station, noting how the other species representatives stepped aside when they saw her coming. Their faces showed the proper mixture of respect and terror that had become humanity's due since the extinction of the Corvan Empire. The council chambers had been redesigned since humanity's return. The human delegation now sat at the head of the great circular table, with the other species arranged in descending order of their perceived threat to human interests. It was a subtle but unmistakable statement of the new reality. Santos took her seat and looked around the table. The Zephyrian ambassador refused to meet her eyes. The Altarian representative kept checking his timepiece nervously. The vegan delegate had actually been trembling when she arrived. Good, they should be afraid. Ladies, gentlemen, and honored beings, Santos began formally. This emergency session of the Galactic Council is now in session. The topic for discussion is the proposed Altarian expansion into the Kepler sector. The Altarian ambassador, a tall reptilian creature named Vex, cleared his throat nervously. Honored human delegate, the Altarian Federation has historically maintained mining rights in that region. We seek only to establish a small research outpost in a sector that borders human space, Santos interrupted smoothly. Without prior consultation with Earth Command, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every being present knew what had happened to the last species that had made territorial moves near human space without permission. I assure you, Vex continued desperately, the Federation has no hostile intentions toward humanity. We seek only to. I'm sure you do, Santos said, her smile as sharp as a blade. Nevertheless, humanity cannot permit unauthorized military expansion in our sphere of influence. We're sure you understand. The unspoken threat hung in the air like a poison cloud. The Altarians could abandon their expansion plans, or they could join the Corvans in extinction. There were no other options. Of course, Vex said quickly, the Federation will reconsider our timeline for development. Santos nodded graciously. Excellent. Now regarding the trade dispute between the Vegan Confederacy and the Centauri Alliance. Back on Earth, Admiral Torres stood in her office overlooking the Pacific, watching as the latest batch of human warships launched from the floating shipyards below. The fleet had tripled in size since the Corvan War, and production showed no signs of slowing. Her aide, Colonel Park, entered with the daily intelligence briefing. Ma'am, long-range sensors have detected what appears to be a previously unknown civilization in the Magellanic Clouds. Initial analysis suggests they're a warrior culture, possibly expansionist. Torres smiled. Threat assessment? Unknown, but they appear to have significant military capability. They've been observing our recent activities with great interest. Torres nodded thoughtfully. During the war, humanity had learned something profound about itself. They weren't just good at fighting, they enjoyed it. 3 centuries of Forced pacifism had suppressed something fundamental about human nature, something that the Corvin massacre had unleashed. They were apex predators, always had been. The only question was whether they would hunt for survival or for sport. Any signs of hostile intent? Torres asked. None detected, ma'am. In fact, they seemed to be withdrawing deeper into their own territory. Smart of them, Torres said. Draft a message to their leadership. Inform them that humanity is aware of their presence and expects them to remain within their current borders. Make it clear that we have no interest in conquest, but we will not tolerate threats to human interests. Park nodded and turned to leave, then paused. Admiral, the other council species are asking about our expansion plans. They want to know how much of the galaxy we intend to claim. Torres looked out at the stars, thinking about the children who had died on New Terra, about the choice humanity had made in response. They could have returned to their old ways after the war, could have tried to rebuild the peaceful civilization they had been. Instead, they had chosen to remain wolves. Tell them, Torres said quietly, that humanity will expand as far as necessary to ensure the safety of our people. If that means we control half the galaxy, so be it. If it means we control all of it. Double quotes, she shrugged. The other species can keep their homeworlds, their cultures, their ways of life, as long as they remember who their protectors are. Park hesitated. Ma'am, some of the intelligence analysts are concerned that we might be becoming the very thing we fought against. A conquering empire. Torres turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Colonel, do you know the difference between the Corvin empire and humanity? No, ma'am. The Corvins conquered for sport. They enslaved for pleasure. They killed for entertainment. Torres looked back out at the stars. We do it for our children. We do it to make sure that what happened at New Terra never happens again, to any human world, anywhere in the galaxy. She paused, then smiled coldly. The other species call us conquerors, tyrants, monsters. Let them, as long as they also call us when they need protection from the real monsters out there in the dark. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, other species told their children new bedtime stories. Stories about the humans who had seemed so peaceful, so civilized, so harmless. Stories about what happened when those humans were pushed too far. Stories about the galaxy's new apex predators, and why you should never, ever threaten their young. The age of human dominance had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. And somewhere in the depths of space, other civilizations looked toward the Milky Way and quietly decided that maybe, just maybe, they would find somewhere else to expand. After all, humans were clearly not a species you wanted to disturb while they were nesting. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity was no longer the guardian of peace. They were the arbiters of war. And they were very, very good at their new job.